We live in a world which has been described by many as a time of overwhelming situations, overwhelming concern. That's not a word that we used a lot until recently. A lot of people today are overwhelmed. We all know the troubles of the world have a way of seeping into our lives, even as Christians, and we get overwhelmed by these problems. The issues of life can inundate our personal world, so we don't know which direction we're going. And even though we know Jesus Christ, if we don't stay focused on the principles of the Word of God, we can get lost and wonder sometimes how we ever get back.
We get overwhelmed by, a marriage breaks down that you were never thinking would do that. A child goes off the rails. Maybe you lost somebody that you loved very, very dearly. A business fell apart. I mean, there is so much to get overwhelmed by. And I have to admit, I've been in full-time ministry for over 3 decades. And I have never seen a time on the earth like I see today, where everywhere I go, doesn't matter what continent I'm on, what country that I'm in, people are just overwhelmed.
One of the most common complaints that people have in today's modern world is this sentence, I just often feel overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed. And there's really a lot to feel overwhelmed about, because there's too much of everything in our world. There's too much information. There's no way you can keep up with all the information that's going on. There's too much news. You don't need to know all the news that's going on in the world, but it's everywhere. There are too many emails, too much social media. Shoot, there's too many toothpaste in the grocery store. And it can just be overwhelming. A lot of people are overwhelmed by debt. They're just in debt, and they go, I'm never going to get out of debt. I'm never going to get these loans paid off. And I'm just overwhelmed. A lot of people are overwhelmed by work. I can't keep up. There's too much work to do. And I just seem to get further and further behind, and I never get a break. And I'm worn out. The Bible talks about a lot of people are overwhelmed by regret. They're overwhelmed by shame or by guilt. In fact, you could be overwhelmed by any emotion. You can be overwhelmed by worry. A lot of people are overwhelmed by insecurity. And the more insecure you are, the more you try to control the things around you. You can be overwhelmed by loneliness. You can be overwhelmed by grief. You can be overwhelmed by anger, resentment, bitterness. You can be overwhelmed by worry. And what do you do when you feel overwhelmed? Financially, physically, when you feel overwhelmed by conflict. This marriage is going south. It isn't going the way I want it to go. We're in a stalemate right now. We're living in the same house, but it's not happening. What do you do when you feel overwhelmed? Turn to God for help. I'm going to turn to God first. Often, when we feel overwhelmed, we start planning. Now, planning's good, and you ought to plan, but you ought to pray before you plan. You need to turn to God before you turn to your plan. Prayer should be your first choice when you feel overwhelmed, not the last resort. Okay? Now, personally, for you, there's no problem too big for you to pray about, and there's no problem too small for you to pray about. If it's big enough for you to worry about, it's big enough for you to pray about. If it's small enough for you to worry about, it's small enough for you to pray about. The second thing I do is I focus on God, not the problem. But it all depends on what you focus on. And when you pray, you turn the focus off of the problem. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough help. I don't have enough wisdom. I don't have enough opportunity. You turn yourself off the problem and you turn it on to the solution, who is God. Corrie ten Boom, the author from the Netherlands, wrote, if you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. Because a lot of things I don't like about me. But if you look at Christ, you'll be at rest. It all depends on what you got your eyes on. If all you're looking at is the negative and the problems in your life, guess what? You're going to be feeling overwhelmed. when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I need to focus not on how big my problem is, but on how big God is. The bigger you realize God is, the smaller your problem seems. Problems shrink when God expands in your life. The bigger your God is, the smaller your problems are. And so the first thing I need is remember that God is all powerful, that God is in control, that nothing is too hard for him, that with God all things are possible. Second, I remember what God has done in the past. And I realize, you know what? I've been through a lot of tough times, and I survived those. And God helped me through other times in the past, so certainly he's going to help me through this one. And I remind myself, I recall, I recollect, I remember all of the ways that God has helped me in the past. I know who you are, and I know what you've done. You need to remind yourself of these two things when you feel overwhelmed. God is a big God, and God has helped you in the past. This is what the Lord says to you who are overwhelmed. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the battle is not yours, but God's. The reason why you're tired all the time is because you're trying to fight battles that belong to God. And you don't have the energy, you don't have the knowledge, and you don't have the power. And you're acting like you're God. If it's to be, it's up to me. And you're frantically trying to make it happen. And you get tired. You are trying to fight God's battles. God says, did I ask you to fight these guys? No. All I asked you to do is just trust me. Have I not promised? Do I not take care of you? Have I not taken care of you in the past? It's not your battle. It's my battle. See, this is why we get into problems. The problem is not your problem. The problem is you think it's up to you to solve it. And so we go out there and we're such fixers. And when we see a relationship problem, we try to fix it. And when we see a financial problem, we try to fix it. And we try to fix the world. And we try to fix the office. And we try to fix the faults in other people's. You can't fix the faults in you. Why are you trying to fix them in somebody else? And we're always just frantically trying to control. And the more insecure and the more out of control your life feels, the more controlling you become. And that doesn't make you a nice person to live with. And so we go out and we try to fix things on our own instead of turning to God. We think it's our battle, and then we inevitably fail. And we come crawling back to God, and we say, oh, God, I'm so sorry. We got our tail between our legs. I'm so sorry, God. I really failed. God, I've really let you down. And God says, no, you didn't let me down because you weren't holding me up. You didn't let me down because you weren't holding me up. You don't hold God up. He holds you up. You don't help God. God helps you. You didn't let God down because you weren't holding him up. He says, it's not your battle in the first place. It's my battle. And this is why you're tired all the time. You're not holding up the world, and you're not holding up God. This is what a lot of you are doing with your problems. Are you tired? Are you tired of facing all these battles on your own? And you're really, if it were true, you're about ready to say, God, I don't know how much longer I can do this. In fact, Lord, I'm on the verge of giving up. And God will say to you, great, it's about time. Now we can get something done. Once you realize you are not in control of your life, you think you are you kidding me? You didn't choose when you were born, where you were born, why you were born. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your natural giftedness. You didn't choose your death. Most of the biggest things in your life, you didn't choose your natural talents. They were totally beyond your control. About the only thing you can change controls your attitude. And that you do have 100% control over. And you do have control over how much you choose to trust God. But you say, God, I just give up. And finally God says, well, great, now we can get something done. God says, first, relax. It's my battle. It's not yours. And the second thing he says is, I'll handle it. God says this to you when you bring him the thing you feel overwhelmed by. He says, relax, I'll handle it. That's my job. How many times have I told you the antidote to stress is to repeat 3 times, God is God and I'm not. God is God and I'm not. Why does God tell you to not get upset when you're in an overwhelming situation? Question. If God is fighting the battle and he's told you to stand still and watch, has God ever lost a battle? No. God has never lost any battle that he chooses to fight. God doesn't lose battles. He's God. God wins. God doesn't lose battles that he chooses to fight. So, what he's saying here is, you don't need to worry about this. You don't need to get upset because you're on the winning side. And there are things that are evil in the world and that we have to oppose. But God says, ultimately, we win in the end. I don't know what's overwhelming you today. You may be a single parent trying to hold it all together. God bless you. You may be all torn up inside with all kinds of different emotion. Discouragement, depression, fear, anxiety, worry, resentment, I don't know. And you're just about to explode on the inside. Or maybe the pressure at work of I cannot get it all done and I cannot keep up financially is just wearing you down. And you may be at the point of saying, God, I just feel like giving up. And God says, great. Why don't you do that right now? Give up and give in.